At the family dinner, my son-in-law mocked my wife's hearing aid and said, "It's just a joke. Lighten up." My daughter stayed silent, staring at her plate. I stood up without a word and showed them the door. They laughed as they left, calling me a sensitive old man. But when they discovered the next morning who actually owned the building my son-in-law was desperately trying to buy into, they realized the joke was entirely on them. Before I tell you how I destroyed his ego and saved my family legacy, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. My name is Garrison Ford. To my neighbors in this quiet suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, I am just a 70-year-old retiree who drives a beat-up 2015 Ford pickup truck and spends too much time tinkering with old engines in his garage. They see me in my stained flannel shirts and worn-out work boots, mowing the lawn on Sundays, or helping Beatrice carry the groceries. They have no idea that the Ford and Sullivan Logistics stands for me. They do not know that 30 years ago, I built a shipping empire that moved freight across 48 states. They certainly do not know that while I sold the management rights years ago to spend time with my wife, I retained the controlling interest and the real estate portfolio. I own the warehouses. I own the land. I own the skyscrapers where men in thousand suits pay rent to me without even knowing my name. I prefer it this way. Silence is power, but silence has its limits. And my limit was reached yesterday on Thanksgiving Day. The house smelled of roasted turkey and sage stuffing, the same recipe Beatrice has used for 40 years. My wife Beatrice is the kindest soul God ever put on this earth. At 68, she still moves with a gentle grace that captivates me. But life has not been kind to her physically. 10 years ago, we were in a terrible accident on the highway. A tire blowout on a semi-truck sent debris flying through our windshield. Beatrice threw herself over our daughter Emily, shielding her from the glass and the impact. Emily walked away without a scratch. Beatrice lost 50% of her hearing in her left ear and 40% in her right, due to the concussive blast. She wears hearing aids now. They are discreet, expensive, and essential to me. Those devices are medals of honor. They represent a mother's sacrifice. To my son-in-law Brad, they are apparently a punchline. Brad is 40. He is a director at Apex Realty, a commercial real estate firm that specializes in high-end office spaces. He drives a leased BMW, wears watches that cost more than my first car, and has a smile that looks like it was practiced in a mirror. He married my daughter Emily 5 years ago. Emily used to be sharp, independent, and kind, but over the last 5 years, I have watched her shrink. She has become a shadow, nodding along to everything Brad says, terrified of rocking the boat. We were sitting at the dining room table. The good china was out. I had just carved the turkey. Brad was on his third glass of wine, holding court as usual. He was bragging about a potential promotion to partner at his firm. He leaned back in his chair, gesturing with his fork. "You listen to me, Garrison." He said, not calling me dad, never calling me sir. "This merger is going to be huge. Apex is looking to buy equity in the Ford Tower downtown. Once I close this deal, I'm going to be running the entire commercial division. We're talking 7 figures. I kept chewing my turkey slowly. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. The Ford Tower, my building, the one I bought through a shell company in 2005. Brad had been working in my building for 5 years, complaining about the management, complaining about the elevators, never realizing that the rent checks his company signed eventually found their way into my trust fund. "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," Beatrice said softly. She leaned forward, cupping her hand slightly behind her ear. "Did you say you were buying a tower, Brad?" The room went quiet. Beatrice had missed the context because of the background noise of the football game on the TV. It was an innocent question. Brad sighed loudly, rolling his eyes toward the ceiling. He looked at Emily, then back at Beatrice. Then he did something that made the blood freeze in my veins. He started moving his lips without making a sound. He exaggerated his mouth movements like a mime pretending to speak but silencing his voice. Beatrice frowned, confused. She tapped her hearing aid thinking the battery had died. "I am sorry, dear," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I cannot hear you. Is my device off?" Brad burst out laughing. It was a loud, barking laugh that echoed off the walls. "Oh my God, Beatrica!" he shouted. "I was just mouthing the words. I was messing with you. You should have seen your face. You looked like a deer in headlights." I looked at Emily. I waited for her to defend her mother. I waited for her to tell her husband to show some respect. Instead, Emily looked down at her mashed potatoes and gave a weak, nervous chuckle. "Brad, stop it," she whispered. But there was no force behind it. "What?" Brad said, grinning at me. "It is just a joke. Lighten up. Honestly, Beatrice, you need to upgrade those things." Or maybe it is not the ears. Maybe the brain is getting a little slow too. Time stopped. In my mind, I was back on Interstate 95. I saw the smoke. I saw the blood on Beatrix's face. I saw her screaming in pain, unable to hear the paramedics, because her eardrums had shattered, saving the woman sitting right next to Brad. That woman, my daughter, was now sipping her wine, letting this clown humiliate the woman who saved her life. I did not scream. Men who build empires do not need to scream. I carefully placed my silverware down on the plate. The clink of the metal against the porcelain cut through the laughter like a gunshot. Brad stopped laughing. He looked at me, a smirk still playing on his lips. "What is the matter, Garrison Turkey, too dry?" I stood up. I am 70, but I am 6'2", and I have spent my life lifting heavy machinery. I placed my hands on the table and leaned in. "Get out," I said. My voice was low, steady, and cold. Brad blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "Get out of my house right now." "Dad, please." Emily started, her voice shrill. "He's just joking. It is Thanksgiving. Do not ruin this." I turned my gaze to my daughter. "I am not the one ruining it. Your husband just insulted your mother for a disability she acquired saving your life. And you laughed. You're both leaving now." Brad stood up, throwing his napkin onto his half-eaten meal. His face turned red, not with shame, but with anger. "Are you serious? You're kicking us out over a joke. You know this is exactly why we do not visit more often. You're a bitter, sensitive old man." "I am a man who demands respect in his own home," I replied. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. The cold November air rushed in. "Go." Brad grabbed his jacket. He marched past me, bumping my shoulder intentionally. He stopped on the porch and spun around, pointing a finger in my face. "You're making a big mistake, Garrison." He sneered. "You think you can treat me like this? I am the future of this family. I am the one making the real money now. You're just a retired mechanic living off Social Security." When he paused, a cruel glint in his eyes. "And hey, do not forget you promised to sign that guarantor loan for Emily next week. We need that $500,000 to secure the down payment on the new house. You treat me like dirt. Maybe I will tell Emily we do not need your help. Maybe we will just cut you off from seeing your grandson entirely." That was the leverage. That was always the leverage. My grandson Leo was not with us today because he was on a school trip. They used him as a pawn. "Get off my property," I said. "Fine," Brad spat. "Come on, Emily, let's go. Let these two rot in their silence." Emily skirted past me, avoiding my eyes. "I will call you tomorrow, Dad," she whispered, but I didn't answer. I watched them get into that leased BMW. I watched them drive away. I closed the door and locked it. Beatrice was crying at the table, her hands covering her hearing aids. I walked over and wrapped my arms around her. I kissed the top of her head. "I am sorry, Garrison," she sobbed. "I ruined dinner." "You did nothing wrong," I told her, my heart breaking. But I promise you this, Beatrice. That man will never step foot in this house again. And he thinks I am a powerless old man. He thinks I am just a signature on a loan document. I looked out the window at the empty driveway. Brad had made the classic mistake of the arrogant. He judged the book by its cover. He thought he was dealing with a senile retiree. He didn't know he had just declared war on the owner of the very ground he stood on. I walked to my study and picked up the phone. I didn't call my daughter. I didn't call to apologize. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 6 months. Harland? I said when the voice answered. Harland Wolf has been my attorney for 40 years. He is a shark in a 3-piece suit, Garrison. Harland sounded surprised. Happy Thanksgiving? Everything all right? No, I said I need you to open the file on Apex Really. Specifically, I want to know everything about an employee named Brad Miller and Harland. Freeze the trust fund I set up for Emily immediately. Consider it done. Harland said, his tone shifting instantly from friend to counsel. What is the play? The play, I said, looking at the family photo on my desk, where Brad's smiling face mocked me, is total demolition. He wants to buy into my building. Let's invite him in. I want to see the look on his face when he realizes who sits at the head of the table. I hung up the phone. My hands were not shaking. I felt a calm, cold clarity. The turkey was cold, but my resolve was burning hot. The next morning was going to be very interesting. The morning after Thanksgiving usually brings a sense of quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes from a full refrigerator and a house that has been well lived in. But this Friday morning, the silence in my kitchen felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I sat at the head of the table nursing a cup of black coffee that had gone cold 10 minutes ago. Through the bay window, I could see Beatrice in the garden. She was wrapped in her thick wool cardigan, deadheading the last of the autumn roses. She moved with a slow, deliberate sadness that twisted a knife in my gut. She was not wearing her hearing aids today. She often took them out when she wanted to shut out the world. And after the humiliation Brad had subjected her to last night, I could not blame her for wanting silence. My phone sat on the granite countertop, face up. It had been buzzing intermittently for the last hour, but I had not touched it. I knew who it was. It was not a call of apology. Men like Brad do not apologize because they do not believe they are ever wrong. To them, the world is a stage where they are the protagonist, and everyone else is merely a supporting character or an obstacle. I finally reached out and tapped the screen. There was a text message from Emily. I put on my reading glasses, hoping for a sliver of the daughter I raised the girl, who used to scrap her knees, climbing trees, and come running to me for a Band-Aid. The message read, Brad is extremely hurt by your behavior last night. He feels completely disrespected in front of the family after working so hard to secure our future. If you do not apologize to him and sign the guarantor paperwork for the $500, $1,000 loan by Monday morning, we will not be bringing Leo for Christmas. We need space from your toxicity until you can learn to support us. I read it twice. Toxicity. That was the word she chose. I built a logistics empire moving hazardous materials across 48 states. I know what toxic is. Toxic is not kicking a disrespectful man out of your house. Toxic is weaponizing a 6-year-old boy because your ego got bruised. Toxic is using my grandson, the only person in this world who looks at me with pure, unadulterated love as a bargaining chip for a bank loan. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Christmas was exactly 1 month away. Leo had been talking about building a tree house with me since July. I had already bought the lumber. It was stacked in the shed, covered by a tarp. Now that lumber might just rot there, all because I refused to let a mediocre real estate broker mock my wife's disability. I felt a surge of anger so potent, my hand shook. They claimed the $500,000 was for a down payment on a new property in Myers Park, a prestigious neighborhood that would signal to all of Brad's superficial friends that he had arrived. He claimed he needed the liquidity to close the deal. Before his year-end bonus cleared, it sounded plausible on the surface. But looking at that text message, at the desperation hidden behind the threat, something did not sit right. A man confident in his finances does not forbid a grandfather from seeing his grandson over a signature. A man secure in his career does not crumble because his father-in-law asked him to leave a dinner table. I was about to dial Harland Wolff to tell him to annul the trust fund I had set up for Emily, to cut the cord entirely and let them float in the deep end when the phone lit up again. It was not a text this time. It was a push notification from the First National Bank Security app. High V-value transaction declined. Unusual activity detected. I swiped the notification open, my eyes narrowed as I parsed the data on the screen. Amount $20,000. Merchant Golden Palace Online Casino. Card ending in 4098. Status declined. Over limit. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. Card 4098. That was not Brad's card. That was not even my primary card. That was the emergency supplementary card I had issued to Emily 10 years ago when she went off to college. It was a card with a specific unbreakable rule attached to it. It was for medical emergencies, car breakdowns, in the middle of nowhere or life or death situations. I had not seen a charge on that card in 3 years. The last time it was used was when Emily had a flat tire on the interstate. Now at 9:15 in the morning on Black Friday, someone had tried to dump $20,000 of my money onto a virtual blackjack table. I closed my eyes and a memory surfaced unbidden. Emily, at 7 years old, standing in my garage in oversized coveralls, I was teaching her how to sort bolts and nuts. I handed her $5 for her help. She asked if she could go buy candy at the corner store. I told her that if she saved it, I would double it next week. She thought about it, her little brow furrowed, and then she put the bill in a glass jar on my workbench. She was so careful then. She understood the weight of labor. She understood that money represented time and effort. Now she was married to a man who treated my credit limit like a bottomless pit, and she was handing him the shovel. There was no way Emily was gambling 20 grand. This was Brad. He had taken her card likely while she was sleeping or distracted and tried to make a desperate play. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. This was not a mistake. You do not accidentally type in a 16-digit card number, an expiration date, and a security code on an offshore gambling site. This was desperation, pure, unadulterated panic, the threat about Christmas, the rush for the $500,000 loan, the explosive anger at dinner when I challenged him. It all snapped into focus. It was not about pride. It was not about a house in Myers Park. Brad was drowning. A man who tries to charge $20,000 to his father-in-law's emergency card the morning after being kicked out is not looking to expand his portfolio. He is looking for a lifeline. I did not call Emily. I did not text back to argue about Christmas. I tapped the contact for Harland Wolff. He answered on the first ring. Harland was always working even on holiday weekends. Garrison? He said, his voice growly and calm. I assume you are calling to vent about the turkey. I am calling to stop a hemorrhage, I said, my voice steady and cold. Harland, I need you to execute a protocol immediately. Access the family authorized user accounts. I want you to freeze everything. The credit cards, the joint checking access I gave Emily for household expenses, the emergency lines of credit, cut them all off right now? There was a pause on the other end. I heard the click of a keyboard. Garrison, this is a nuclear option. Did they call you? They did more than call, I replied, watching Beatrice wipe a tear from her cheek in the garden. Brad just tried to run a $20,000 charge through an online casino using Emily's emergency card. The transaction failed because I kept the limit on that specific card lower than he apparently realized, but the intent was there. He tried to steal from me Harland. Harlan let out a low whistle. That changes the landscape considerably. That is not a domestic dispute, Garrison. That is attempted fraud. It is, I said, but Harlan freezing the accounts is not enough. I want you to dig. I want a full forensic accounting on Brad Miller. I want to know why a director of real estate who claims to be on the verge of a seven-figure merger is so desperate for $500,000 in cash that he is threatening to withhold my grandson. I turned away from the window, looking at the empty spot on the wall where a family portrait used to hang. Find out who he owes Harland. Find out how deep the hole is. Because I have a feeling that $500 Susan dollars loan he wants me to sign for is not for a house. It is for a life raft. And I want to know exactly how heavy the stone tied to his ankle is before I decide whether to cut the rope or let him sink. Get me everything I whispered into the phone, every debt, every lien, every secret. I want to know exactly who I am dealing with when I destroy him. Harland Wolf pulled into my driveway exactly 2 hours after our phone call. He drove a black sedan that looked like it belonged to a government agency, understated but undeniably powerful. When he stepped out clutching a thick manila folder against his chest, his expression was grim. Harland has seen everything in his 40 years of practicing law, from corporate espionage to nasty divorces. So when his face looks like a storm front moving in, you know the news is not just bad, it is catastrophic. I let him in without a word. We walked past the living room where Beatrice was resting on the sofa. Her eyes closed, listening to an audiobook, with her one good ear pressed to the pillow. We went straight to my study, the only room in the house where the air didn't feel suffocating. I sat behind my desk, the same desk where I had signed the papers to sell the management rights of my company years ago. Harlan sat opposite me and placed the folder on the mahogany surface. It landed with a heavy, ominous thud. "You were right to freeze the accounts, Garrison," Harlan said, skipping the pleasantries. "But the gambling debt, that was just the tip of the iceberg. That $20,000 charge was a Hail Mary pass. He was trying to turn 20 grand into 500 grand in a single morning because he is running out of time." I looked at the folder, afraid to open it, yet needing to know. What is it? Harland? Is it loan sharks? Is he in debt to the wrong people? Harland shook his head. It is worse. It is corporate theft. He flipped the folder open. Spread out before me were copies of internal emails, bank transfer records, and a preliminary audit report marked confidential. "Your son-in-law is not getting promoted to partner." Harland explained, his voice low and precise. "He is currently the subject of a quiet internal investigation at Apex Realty. It appears that over the last 6 months, Brad has been diverting client escrow deposits into a personal holding account. He has been moving money around using new deposits to pay off old ones, a classic Ponzi scheme structure within his own deals. But last week, a major commercial deal fell through, and the client demanded their deposit back immediately. I stared at the numbers highlighted in yellow. The missing sum was exactly $485,000. He needs $500,000 not to buy a house in Myers Park. Harlan continued, he needs it to refill the escrow account before the external auditors arrive on Monday morning. If that money is not back in place by the start of business next week, he is not just looking at getting fired. He is looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. The audacity was breathtaking. He had come into my home, eaten my food, mocked my wife, and threatened to take my grandson away, all while standing on a trapdoor of his own making. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was asking me to be his accomplice in covering up a felony. He wanted me to sign a guarantor loan so he could wash his hands of a crime he committed to fund his leased BMWs and his ego. And Emily? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Does she know Harlan's side? There is no evidence she knows about the theft, but she knows they are broke. The credit report shows they are maxed out on every card. She is likely terrified Garrison. She thinks this loan is to save their lifestyle. She probably has no idea it is to keep her husband out of handcuffs. I looked down at the documents again, my eyes scanning the letterhead of Brad's company, Apex Really. I saw the logo. I saw the address listed at the bottom of the page. Suite 4400 South Tryon Street, the Ford Tower. I stopped. I read the address again. Then I looked up at Harlan, a slow, cold realization dawning on me. Harlan, I said. Brad works at the Ford Tower. Harlan nodded, a small, grim smile playing on his lips. I checked that myself this morning. Apex Really leases the entire 40th floor. They have been tenants for 5 years. They just renewed their lease negotiation 6 months ago. They pay a premium for that view. I started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry rattling sound that came from deep in my chest. Brad had spent years complaining about that building. At Christmas dinners, he would whine about the elevators being too slow, or the lobby being outdated, or the ownership being some faceless, geriatric conglomerate that didn't understand modern business needs. He had mocked the very structure that put a roof over his head during the workday. He works in my house, I said, the irony tasting like iron in my mouth. He sat at my table and called me a useless old man, all while sitting in an office that I own. He pays rent to me. His boss pays rent to me. I stood up and walked to the window. The rage I had felt last night had crystallized into something colder, harder. It was no longer about anger, it was about justice. Brad Miller thought he was a shark swimming among minnows. He didn't realize he was swimming in my tank. He wants money, I said to the glass reflection. He wants a bailout. He thinks he can bully a senile old grandfather into signing a check. I turned back to Harlan. My attorney was watching me, waiting for the order. He knew me. He knew I didn't get to where I was by letting people steal from me or disrespect my family. Do not give him a dime, Harlan, I said. Harlan closed the folder. Understood. I will draft the rejection letter for the loan guarantor. We can have it delivered by courier to his home. No, I interrupted. That is too easy. A letter he can rip up. A letter he can hide from Emily. I walked back to the desk and tapped my finger on the Apex Really letterhead. He thinks I am a relic. He thinks I am powerless. Let's show him exactly how much power this relic has. Harlan, I want you to call the CEO of Apex Really. Use the holding company name. Tell him the owner of the Ford Tower wants to review the tenant agreement personally. Tell him the ownership is looking to restructure the lease and is interested in meeting with their top performers to discuss equity opportunities. Harlan's eyebrows shot up. You want to meet him? I want to meet the man who thinks he is too good for my family, I said. But I don't want to meet him as his father-in-law. I want to meet him as his landlord. I want to meet him as the man who holds the keys to his office and apparently the keys to his freedom. Set up a meeting, Harlan. Tell them the chairman of Ford Holdings is coming down from the mountain. Tell them I want to meet their rising star, the man who is about to make partner. I want to look him in the eye when he thinks he is winning. Harlan stood up, buttoning his jacket. He looked at me with a mixture of concern and admiration. This is going to destroy him, Garrison. If you walk into that office as the owner and you expose him, he will never recover. I thought about Beatrice crying at the table. I thought about the silence in her world, a silence Brad had mocked for a cheap laugh. I thought about the $20,000 he tried to steal from my daughter's emergency card. I am not pushing him off the ledge, Harland, I said quietly. He jumped a long time ago. I am just the one who is going to remove the safety net he thinks is there. Make the call. I want that meeting tomorrow. And Harland, make sure he knows this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I want him to walk into that room thinking he has won the lottery. Harland nodded and left the room. I stood alone in the silence of my study. I looked at the picture of my grandson on the bookshelf. I was doing this for him too. A boy needs a father, yes, but a boy does not need a father who is a thief and a bully. Sometimes you have to burn the field to save the crop. I sat back down and waited for the phone to ring. The game had changed. Brad thought he was playing poker with a blind man. He was about to find out that the house always wins, especially when he is playing in my house. The call came to Brad just before noon on Monday. He was sitting at his desk on the 40th floor, sweating through his dress shirt as he tried to juggle 3 different credit card balance transfer applications on his computer screen. I know this because I have access to the company servers now. I could see his digital footprints panic. But when his phone rang and the executive assistant from Ford Holdings identified herself, the panic vanished instantly, replaced by that slick, predatory confidence that had fooled my daughter for 5 years. He was told that the chairman of the holding company, the mysterious owner of the building he worked in, had reviewed the tenant files and identified him as a high potential asset. They wanted to discuss a private equity partnership. Brad hung up the phone and immediately called Emily. I could practically hear the arrogance dripping from his voice, even though I wasn't on the line. He told her that he had finally been recognized, that the big players saw his value, and that their money problems were about to disappear. He didn't mention the embezzlement investigation. He didn't mention the loan sharks he was likely dodging. He just saw a golden ticket. 2 hours later, I was sitting in a leather armchair in a room that officially did not exist on the building schematics. It was an observation suite adjacent to the main executive boardroom on the penthouse level, separated by a large pane of one-way glass. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of the audio console in front of me. I put on the heavy noise-canceling headphones and adjusted the volume. Through the glass, I could see the boardroom perfectly. It was a space designed to intimidate, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charlotte skyline, a table made of reclaimed black walnut that cost more than Brad's car, and artwork that I had collected over 3 decades. My CEO, Arthur Sterling, sat at the head of the table. Arthur is a man of few words and immense presence. A former military officer who runs my holding company with the precision of a watchmaker. He knew exactly what he had to do. He knew the script. The heavy oak doors opened and Brad walked in. He had freshened up. His hair was perfectly gelled, his suit jacket buttoned, his smile wide and eager. He walked with a strut that made my stomach turn. He looked around the room, taking in the luxury, the power, and I could see the greed flare in his eyes. He didn't see a boardroom. He saw a vault he wanted to crack. Arthur stood up and shook his hand. "Mr. Miller, thank you for coming up on such short notice." Arthur said, his voice smooth and professional. "Please have a seat." Brad sat down, attempting to look relaxed, but I saw the way his fingers drummed nervously on the armrest. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Sterling," Brad said. "It is an honor. I've been saying for years that Apex really needs to align more closely with the building ownership." Arthur nodded, opening a thin file in front of him. "We have been watching your performance, Brad. You close deals. You are aggressive. We like aggressive. We are looking to expand our private investment portfolio, and we need partners who aren't afraid to take risks. However, we typically require our partners to have significant personal liquidity. We need to know they have skin in the game." This was the test. I leaned forward in the dark, watching my son-in-law's face. I knew he had zero liquidity. I knew he was negative $400,000 in the hole. I wanted to see how he would spin it. Brad didn't even blink. He leaned back, crossing his legs, projecting an image of casual wealth. Liquidity is not an issue, Mr. Sterling. He lied smoothly. I have significant family resources at my disposal. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Family resources. We were under the impression you were a salaried director. Brad chuckled, a dismissive, condescending sound. Oh, the salary is just for show. It keeps me busy. The real money comes from my wife's side. My father-in-law, Garrison Ford, he did well for himself back in the day. Blue-collar stuff, logistics, trucking, but he piled up a fair amount of cash. My hands clenched into fists on the armrests of my chair. He was using my name. He was using the very success he mocked to sell himself to a stranger. Arthur glanced at the mirror, knowing I was watching. And does Mr. Ford manage these assets actively? Arthur asked. Brad waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. Garrison, no. God, no. The man is ancient. He is completely out of touch with modern finance. He keeps his money in low-yield savings accounts and worries about the price of gas. Honestly, between you and me, he is losing it. He is becoming senile. He forgets things. He gets confused about simple numbers. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing the air in my lungs. Senile, confused. This was the man who had sat at my table, eaten my food, and smiled in my face, while secretly waiting for my mind to rot so he could loot the treasury. Brad leaned in closer to Arthur, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I am effectively managing the estate now. I handle all the finances. He signs whatever I put in front of him because he trusts me, and frankly, because he doesn't understand the paperwork anymore. He is on his last legs, Mr. Sterling. His health is failing rapidly. The doctors don't give him much time, maybe a year, maybe less. When he passes, everything transfers to my wife, and by extension to me. So when I say I have capital, I mean I have access to 8 figures of capital that is just sitting there waiting to be deployed by someone who knows what they are doing. I sat in the darkness, stunned into silence. He wasn't just lying about my money, he was burying me. He was telling a potential business partner that I was dying, that I was incompetent, that I was nothing more than an obstacle waiting to be removed. He was trading on my death. The sheer malice of it took my breath away. He had stood on my porch and threatened to keep my grandson away. And now I knew why. He didn't care about the relationship. He cared about control. He wanted me isolated, weak, and pliable. Arthur Sterling is a professional, but even he flinched slightly. I saw a flicker of disgust cross his face before he smoothed it back into a neutral expression. That is a very fortunate position for you, Arthur said, his voice flat. So you are saying you have total control over the Ford assets 100%, Brad said, grinning. The old man is just a signature at this point, a rubber stamp. I am the brain. He is just the wallet, and a dying one at that. I took off the headphones for a second, the silence of the observation room ringing in my ears. I looked at my reflection in the glass superimposed over Brad's smiling face. I did not look senile. I did not look dying. I looked like a man who had just been handed the murder weapon with the fingerprints still fresh. I put the headphones back on. Arthur closed the file. Well, Brad, that changes things. We are looking for a partner who can bring a guarantor to the table for this initial venture. We are launching a new high-yield real estate fund. The buy-in is substantial, but the returns are projected at 20% quarterly. Brad's eyes widened. 20%. Yes, Arthur said, but because of the nature of the deal, we need a secure backer. Since you have control over the Ford estate, this should be a formality for you. We would be willing to bring you in as a junior partner immediately with a signing bonus of, say, $500,000 to cover your initial equity position, provided we have a secured guarantor. $500,000, the exact amount he needed to stay out of prison. The bait was in the water. Brad licked his lips. He was practically vibrating with greed. He saw his escape route. He saw a way to pay back the stolen money, keep his job, and become a partner, all in one stroke. "What do you need?" Brad asked, his voice breathless. Arthur slid a single sheet of paper across the polished table. It was a standard personal guarantee agreement drafted by Harlan that morning. It was simple, brutal, and binding. "We need Garrison Ford's signature on this." Arthur said, "If you truly manage his assets, and if he signs what you tell him to, this should be easy. Bring me this document signed by your father-in-law by tomorrow morning, and we will wire the $500,000 bonus to your personal account immediately. You will be a partner at Ford Holdings." Brad picked up the paper. His hands were shaking not with fear but with excitement. He saw a piece of paper. He didn't see the trap. He didn't know that by bringing me that paper, he was proving everything I suspected. He was proving he would use me, deceive me, and defraud me to save his own skin. "Done," Brad said, standing up. "Consider it done. I will have this signed tonight. Like I said, he does what I tell him. He won't even read it." Arthur stood up and shook his hand again. "I look forward to it, Brad. It sounds like you are exactly the kind of man we've been looking for." Brad walked out of that boardroom feeling like a king. He thought he had just conned the CEO of a major conglomerate. He thought he had secured his future. He didn't know he had just confessed his plans to rob me blind to the very people who were recording every word. I watched him leave the heavy door closing behind him with a soft click. I sat in the dark for a long time. I replayed his words in my mind. "The old man is just a signature. He is dying. It will all be mine." The sadness I had felt for my daughter was gone. The hesitation I had about destroying the father of my grandson was gone. This was not a man. This was a parasite. And you do not negotiate with parasites. You eradicate them. I pressed the intercom button to speak to Arthur in the boardroom. "Arthur," I said, my voice sounding strange and hollow in the small room. "Yes, sir," Arthur replied, looking at the mirror. "Get the legal team ready for tomorrow morning," I said. "And tell security to expect a guest when he comes back with that signature. I want everyone there. I want him to have an audience when the curtain falls." "Understood, sir." "Are you okay?" "No, Arthur," I said, looking at the empty chair where Brad had sat. "I am not okay, but I will be." I took off the headset and walked out of the observation room. I took the private elevator down to the garage, got into my old Ford truck, and drove home. I had to prepare Beatrice. I had to prepare myself because tonight Brad was going to come crawling back to my house with his lies and his fake apologies. And I was going to have to look him in the eye and pretend to be the senile old fool he thought I was. I was going to have to sign that paper. It would be the most difficult performance of my life, but I would do it. I would sign his death warrant with a smile because tomorrow the joke would finally be over. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon when the headlights of the leased BMW swept across my living room wall. I was sitting in the dark, holding Beatrix's hand. She was nervous. Her hands were cold, and she kept adjusting the collar of her blouse, worrying that she wasn't dressed formally enough for a Tuesday night visit from her daughter. I didn't have the heart to tell her that they weren't coming for tea and sympathy. They were coming for a signature. They were coming because a predator had been backed into a corner and he needed a way out. I squeezed her hand gently. "Just let me do the talking," I told her. "You do not have to say anything. You just have to be here." She nodded, trusting me as she always has, unaware that I was about to stage a performance that would rival anything on Broadway. The doorbell rang. It wasn't the tentative ring of a guest. It was a firm, expectant press. I walked to the door, my steps heavy and deliberate. I needed to look the part. I slumped my shoulders slightly. I let my face relax into a mask of tired resignation. I opened the door and there they were. Brad stood in the forefront wearing a different suit than he had worn at the office hours earlier. He had loosened his tie, trying to look like a hard-working man at the end of a long day. In his hand, he clutched a bouquet of supermarket carnations, the kind with the price tag still sticker scratched off the plastic wrapper. They were cheap, wilted things, an insult disguised as a peace offering. Emily stood behind him looking pale and anxious, clutching her purse with white knuckles. "Hi, Garrison," Brad said. His voice dropped an octave, modulating into a tone of deep, manufactured regret. "May we come in?" I stepped aside without a word. They walked into the hallway, the air instantly feeling thinner, charged with their desperation. Brad didn't look at me. He made a beeline for the living room where Beatrix sat. I followed slowly, watching him like a hawk circling a field mouse. Beatrice stood up when they entered, her eyes wide and uncertain. Brad didn't just walk up to her. He staged a scene. He crossed the room with long, dramatic strides, and then right in front of my wife, he dropped to his knees on the hardwood floor. It was such a theatrical, overblown gesture that I almost snorted. He looked up at her, making sure to catch the light, his eyes shimmering with what I assumed were crocodile tears he had summoned on the drive over. "Patrice," he said, his voice trembling. "Mom, I am so sorry. I do not know what came over me on Thanksgiving. The stress of the job, the pressure of this merger, it just got to me. I haven't been sleeping. I haven't been thinking straight." He held up the sad bouquet of flowers like an offering to a deity. I should never have made that joke. He continued pressing his hand to his chest. It was cruel and thoughtless. "You are the heart of this family, and I disrespected you. Please, can you find it in your heart to forgive a foolish man who is just trying to do his best?" Beatrice, my sweet, forgiving Beatrice, melted instantly. She reached down and touched his cheek. "Oh, Brad," she said softly. "Stand up, dear. Please, we all have bad days. Of course I forgive you." She took the flowers and cradled them as if they were rare orchids. I watched Emily during this performance. She wasn't looking at her husband or her mother, she was looking at me, gauging my reaction, waiting to see if the show was working. Her eyes were pleading, begging me to buy into the lie so that her life could go back to its fragile equilibrium. Brad stood up, dusting off his knees. He turned to me, his expression shifting from contrition to a sort of manly humility. "And Garrison," he said, "I owe you an apology too. I spoke out of turn in your house. I let my pride get the better of me. I hope we can put this behind us." I looked at him. I saw the man who had called me senile 3 hours ago. I saw the man who had laughed about waiting for me to die so he could liquidate my assets. It took every ounce of discipline I possessed not to strike him right there. Instead, I sighed, a long, weary sound of an old man too tired to fight. "It is forgotten." I lied. Family is family right. Brad's shoulders sagged in relief. He exchanged a quick, triumphant glance with Emily. The hard part was over. Now came the ask. They sat on the sofa, declining Beatrix's offer of tea. They didn't want to stay long, they had a timeline. Brad needed that document signed and returned to Arthur Sterling by tomorrow morning to get his $500,000 $1,000 bonus, the money he needed to fill the hole in his escrow account before he went to prison. "So, Dad," Emily started, her voice tight, "since we are all good now, we were hoping we could settle that paperwork tonight, for the house in Myers Park. Brad needs to submit the guarantor form first thing in the morning to lock in the rate." Brad reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the single sheet of paper Arthur had given him. He didn't even have the decency to put it in a folder. He smoothed it out on the coffee table, pushing it toward me along with a gold pen. "It is just a standard form," Garrison, Brad said casually. Just confirms that you are backing us. No money changes hands, obviously. It is just a formality to show the bank we have solid family support. I looked at the paper. It was the personal guarantee I had drafted with Harland. It was ironclad. By signing it, I wasn't just guaranteeing a loan. I was guaranteeing that I was witnessing his fraud. I was giving him the rope. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled slightly. I let it tremble. I wanted them to see the weakness. I wanted them to feel confident. I leaned forward, squinting at the document. I patted my pockets, frowning. I do not have my reading glasses, I mumbled. The print is so small these days. You do not need to read it all. Now, Daddy, Emily said quickly. Too quickly. It is exactly what we talked about. Just sign at the bottom. Brad needs this done tonight. I hesitated. I looked at Brad. He was leaning forward, his eyes locked on the pen tip, his breath shallow. He was so close. He could almost taste the money. I want to help you kids, I said slowly. I really do. But you know how I am about legal documents. I promised Harland I wouldn't sign anything without a witness or a notary. It is the way I have always done business. Brad's smile faltered. But Dad, it is late. The offices are closed. We can't get a notary tonight. I sat back, putting the pen down. Well, then we will have to do it tomorrow morning. Panic flared in Brad's eyes. He couldn't wait. He needed to turn this into Arthur first thing, but he also couldn't push too hard, or he would blow his cover. He had to play the game. Tomorrow morning, he asked, his voice tight. Yes, I said. I am going to Harland's office tomorrow at 9:00 for some estate planning anyway. Why don't you meet me there? We can do it properly. Harland can notarize it. We make it official and you can take it straight to your bank. I watched the gears turn in his head. 9:00. It was cutting it close, but it was doable. He could meet me, get the signature, and rush it up to the penthouse to Arthur by 9:30. He would still save his skin. Okay, Brad said, forcing a smile back onto his face. 9:00 works. We will meet you at Harland's office. Great Emily exhaled, looking like she might faint from relief. Thank you, Dad. Thank you so much. You are saving us. You have no idea, I thought. I stood up, signaling that the audience was over. Well, I am tired. Beatrice needs her rest. We will see you in the morning. They stood up, eager to leave. The air in the room felt lighter to them, but to me it felt heavy, with the weight of the coming storm. Brad hugged Beatrice again, a little too hard, playing the role of the grateful son-in-law to the very end. He even patted my shoulder. Get some sleep, Garrison, he said condescendingly. We appreciate this. Really? I walked them to the door. I watched them step out into the cool night air. As they walked down the porch steps, Brad leaned in close to Emily. He thought they were out of earshot. He thought the old man had closed the door. But I had left it cracked open just an inch. I told you I heard Brad whisper, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. He is a pushover. The old geezer didn't even read it. Easy money, Em. We are home free. Emily giggled, a nervous, complicit sound that broke my heart one final time. I watched them get into the car. I watched the taillights fade down the street. I closed the door and locked the deadbolt. I turned off the porch light, plunging the driveway into darkness. Easy money, I repeated to the empty hallway. I walked back to the living room window and looked out at the street where they had disappeared. The anger was gone now. All that was left was a cold, hard resolve. Brad thought he had survived the night. He thought he had outsmarted the senile old man. He had no idea that he had just agreed to walk into his own execution. I turned to Beatrice, who was putting the cheap carnations into a vase of water. Leave them, Beatrice, I said gently. She looked at me confused. But they will die without water, Garrison. They are already dead, I said. Just like his career, just like his lies. I went upstairs to lay out my suit for the morning. I chose my best suit, a charcoal gray, bespoke three-piece that I hadn't worn in 5 years. I polished my shoes until I could see my reflection in the leather. I wasn't dressing for a meeting. I was dressing for a funeral. Enjoy your last night of freedom, son. I whispered into the darkness of the bedroom. Because tomorrow morning you aren't walking into a lawyer's office to sign a loan. You are walking into a room full of people who know exactly who you are. And I, Palms, am going to be the one who turns on the lights. The morning sun sliced through the floor to ceiling windows of Harland Wolff's conference room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table wearing the charcoal gray three-piece suit I had laid out the night before. I had shaved, closely combed my silver hair back, and put on the gold cufflinks Beatrice gave me for our 30th anniversary. I looked every inch the tycoon I used to be. Not the retired mechanic Brad thought he knew. But Brad was too distracted to notice. He was pacing the length of the room, checking his expensive watch every 30 seconds, his eyes darting between the door and the document sitting in the center of the table. Emily sat to my right, wringing her hands in her lap. She looked small, diminished by the tension radiating from her husband. Beatrice sat to my left, calm and composed, wearing her new hearing aids, though she had wisely turned the volume down to tune out Brad's nervous muttering. Harland entered the room exactly at 9:00. He did not smile. He carried a leather portfolio and walked with the heavy, purposeful stride of an executioner approaching the block. He sat down opposite me, placing the portfolio on the table with deliberate precision. "Good morning, Harland," said his voice dry as parchment. "Let's make this quick." Harland Brad snapped, stopping his pacing and leaning over the table. "I have a 9:30 meeting with the investment board at Ford Holdings. I cannot be late. We just need Garrison to notarize the signature on the guarantor form. That is it." Harland looked at Brad over the rim of his reading glasses. He did not rush. He opened his portfolio and smoothed out a stack of papers. "In my office, Mr. Miller, we do not rush legal documents," Harland said. "Especially not when my client is assuming liability for a significant sum. Before Garrison signs anything, I need to review the collateral structure you have outlined here." Brad groaned, throwing his hands up. "Call. There is no collateral. It is a character loan based on family assets. That is what Arthur Sterling and I discussed. It is a formality. Garrison knows that, right, Garrison?" He looked at me, his eyes pleading for me to be the confused old man again, to just nod and sign. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers. "I am listening to my attorney, Brad," I said calmly. "If Harland has questions, we answer them." Brad gritted his teeth. "Fine. What is the problem?" Harland pulled a document from the bottom of his stack. It was a property title search. "You stated in your application to Ford Holdings that you have significant personal equity," Harland began. "Specifically, you listed your current residence at 42 Maple Drive as an unencumbered asset." "That is right," Brad said quickly. "We own it." "Well, Emily owns it, but we are married. It is ours." "That is interesting," Harland said. "Because when I ran a title search this morning to verify the asset for Garrison's protection, I found something disturbing." Harland slid the paper across the table toward Emily. "Not Brad," Emily Harland said gently. "Are you aware that a second mortgage was recorded against your home 30 days ago?" Emily blinked, confused. "What? No, that is impossible. My dad bought that house for me. It is paid off. We do not have a mortgage." Harland pointed to a line on the document. "This is a lien in the amount of $200,000 secured against the property. It is not from a bank, Emily. It is from a private lending entity called Red Rock Capital." I watched the color drain from Emily's face. She looked at the paper, then at Brad. "Brad." She asked, her voice trembling, "What is this?" Brad was sweating now. Visible beads of perspiration were forming on his forehead. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a choked cough. "It is a mistake," he said, his voice rising in pitch. "A clerical error. I told you, Harlan, these databases are always outdated. We do not have a mortgage." Harlan did not look away from him. He pulled another paper from his file. This was a copy of the loan agreement. "This is the deed of trust, signed and notarized last month," Harlan said. "And here's the signature page." He turned the page around. There were two signatures at the bottom. One was Brad Miller, the other was Emily Ford Miller. Emily leaned in, squinting at the signature. Then she recoiled as if the paper had burned her. "That is not my signature," she whispered. "I never signed this. I never met with anyone from Red Rock Capital." Harlan looked at Brad. "That is what I thought." "This is a forgery, Brad. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. You falsified your wife's signature to secure a high-interest loan from a predatory lender. You put the house your father-in-law bought for his daughter at risk to cover what exactly gambling debts." The room went deathly silent. Brad was cornered. The walls were closing in on him. He looked at Emily, then at me, then at the door. For a second, I thought he might run. Instead, he doubled down on the lie. "You are lying," Brad shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Harlan. "You are trying to sabotage me. You doctored these documents." "Emily, baby, listen to me. This lawyer is working with your dad to ruin my career. They are jealous. They do not want us to succeed." Emily stood up her chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "You mortgaged our house?" she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "You told me we were debt-free. You told me the credit cards were under control. You put a lien on the only thing I own." "It is for the business," Brad yelled back, his mask of composure shattering completely. "You do not understand finance, Emily. You have to leverage assets to grow. I was going to pay it back next week with the bonus from Ford Holdings. It was a bridge loan. A bridge loan from a loan shark," Harlan corrected coldly, "with an interest rate of 40%. You were not investing, Brad. You were digging a hole to bury another hole, and you committed a felony to do it. Mortgage fraud, identity theft, forgery." I looked at Brad. He was panting, his eyes wild. He looked at me, and for the first time, he didn't see a senile old man. He saw a witness. "Garrison, tell him to stop," Brad pleaded, switching tactics to begging. "Sign the guarantor form. If I get that bonus today, I can pay off Red Rock. I can fix this. Just sign the paper, old man. Do it for your daughter. If you don't, we lose the house." He was still doing it, still threatening me, still using his own failures as a weapon. He was telling me that if I didn't bail him out, he would drag my daughter down with him. He was like a drowning man trying to climb on top of his rescuer. "You are despicable," I said. It was the first time I had spoken since the meeting began. Brad sneered. "I am a survivor unlike you, sitting on your pile of cash doing nothing. I am out there fighting. Now sign the paper, or so help me God. I will make sure you never see Leo again. I will take him and move to the other side of the country." That was it. The final threat. The final insult. I felt a calm settle over me, absolute and terrifying. I looked at Harlan and nodded. "Enough," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a gavel striking a block. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my suit jacket. I looked Brad in the eye, and I let the mask fall away completely. The confused, squinting retiree vanished. In his place stood Garrison Ford, the man who had negotiated union contracts with mobsters in the 80s, and won. "Harlan," I said, "open the screen." Harlan pressed a button on the remote control. The motorized blinds on the far wall descended, darkening the room. A large projection screen descended from the ceiling. The projector hummed to life. "What is this?" Brad asked, his voice wavering. What are you doing? I am showing you the reality of your situation, son, I said. The screen flickered and then an image appeared. It was a corporate organizational chart. At the bottom were various LLCs and holding companies. One of them was Apex Realty. Above that was a company called Summit Ventures. And above that, at the very top of the pyramid, was a single entity Ford Holdings International. And right next to the name of the holding company was a list of the board of directors. There was only one name listed as chairman and majority shareholder, Garrison Ford. Brad stared at the screen. He squinted, he blinked. He shook his head as if trying to clear a hallucination. I do not understand, he stammered. Ford Holdings. That is the company that owns my building. That is the company Arthur Sterling works for. Yes, I said, walking around the table until I was standing right next to him. Arthur Sterling works for Ford Holdings and Ford Holdings works for me. I leaned in close and my face inches from his. You called me a senile old man, Brad. You told your potential partners that I was incompetent. You said I was dying. Well, I have some news for you. The man you were trying to con, the man whose building you work in, the man whose payroll you are on, that is me. Brad's knees gave out. He literally collapsed back into his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked from the screen to me, then to Emily, who was staring at the chart with her hand over her mouth. You, Brad whispered. You own the Ford Tower, yeah? I own the tower, I said. I own the parking garage you park your leased car in. And as of 9 hours this morning, when I executed a hostile buyout clause in the Apex Realty lease agreement due to financial irregularities, I own 51% of the company you work for. I picked up the guarantor form he had brought. I held it up to the light. You wanted a signature from the owner of the Ford estate, I asked. Well, you are looking at him. But I am not signing a loan for you, Brad. I am signing your termination notice. The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the hum of the projector fan. Brad looked small. He looked like a child who had been caught playing with matches and burned down the house. Emily looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Dad, you are rich. I looked at my daughter. I saw the shock, the betrayal, and the confusion. I am, Emily, I said softly. I never told you because I wanted you to build your own life. I wanted you to find a man who loved you for you, not for my money. I pointed a finger at Brad, who was shrinking into his seat. And now we know exactly what kind of man you found. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound in the room, a low mechanical, where that seemed to count down the remaining seconds of Brad's career. The organizational chart glowed on the screen, a digital tapestry of my life's work that I'd kept hidden for decades, now burning its truth into my daughter's retinas. Emily sat frozen, her eyes darting between the screen and my face, trying to reconcile the father who drove a 10-year-old truck with the man listed as the chairman of a multi-million-dollar holding company. Why? She whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of the revelation. Dad, why didn't you tell us? We were struggling. We were drowning in debt, and you had all this. I looked at her, and for a moment the steel in my spine softened. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to build your own life, Emily, I said, my voice low and steady. I wanted you to find your own strength. I gave you a debt-free education. I bought you your first home. I gave you every tool to succeed. But I withheld the fortune because money is a magnifying glass. It reveals who people truly are. And I needed to know if the people around me loved Garrison the father or Garrison the bank account. I turned my gaze slowly to Brad, who was slumped in his chair, his face a mask of ash and terror. And thanks to your husband, I got my answer. Brad shook his head, a jerky, spasmodic motion. He was trying to speak, but his throat seemed to have seized up. He looked at the screen again at the line connecting Ford Holdings to Apex Really. He was doing the math in his head, calculating the sheer scale of his miscalculation. He had spent 5 years walking through the lobby of the Ford Tower, sneering at the security guards, complaining about the maintenance, calling the ownership outdated and out of touch. He had insulted the landlord while living in the landlord's house. This isn't possible. Brad stammered, his voice thin and ready. You can't own Apex. We are a privately held firm. The partners would never sell to you. Harland Wolff leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger on the stack of documents in front of him. Correction, Mr. Miller. You were a privately held firm, but your partners were facing a liquidity crisis due to some, let's call them, irregularities in the escrow accounts. When Ford Holdings approached them this morning with a generous buyout offer for a controlling interest coupled with an immediate capital injection to stabilize the firm, they were quite eager to sign. As of 9 years this morning, the ink is dry. Harlan slid a document across the table. It was the acquisition agreement signed, sealed, and stamped. Garrison Ford now controls 51% of the voting stock of Apex Really, Harlan said with a shark-like grin. He is your boss's boss. He is the board. Brad looked at the document as if it were a radioactive isotope. He didn't touch it. He just stared at the signature line, his eyes wide with horror. He realized then that the trap hadn't just sprung shut. It had been built around him brick by brick, while he was too busy admiring his own reflection to notice. I walked closer to him, stopping until I was looming over his chair. I wanted him to feel my presence. I wanted him to feel the weight of the senile old man he had mocked. You sat in my dining room. I said, my voice cold and hard as granite. You ate my food, and you told your friends, you told my own CEO that I was a dying, incompetent relic. You said I was a rubber stamp. You said I didn't understand modern business. I leaned down, placing my hands on the arms of his chair, trapping him. Well, Brad, let me give you a lesson in modern business. Rule number 1, know who you are dealing with. You thought you were the predator in this family. You thought you were the shark, but you were just a parasite, feeding on a host you didn't understand. You mistook my silence for weakness. You mistook my kindness for stupidity. Brad shrank back, pressing himself into the leather upholstery. Garrison, please? He wheezed. I was just talking. It was sales talk. I didn't mean it. We can work this out. I can help you run the company. I know the accounts. I know the clients. You know how to steal. I corrected him sharply. You know how to embezzle. You know how to forge signatures. That is not business, Brad. That is crime. I straightened up, adjusting my cufflinks. The disgust I felt for him was physical. A bitter taste in the back of my throat. You called me a joke, I said. You told my wife to lighten up. You laughed at her disability. Do you know who bought her those hearing aids, Brad? I did. With the money I made building the empire you are currently begging to be a part of. I walked back to the head of the table and stood next to Harland. I looked at the projection screen one last time at the empire I had built with blood, sweat, and integrity. Then I looked back at the man who had tried to stain it. You wanted to be a partner, I said. You wanted to be a big shot. Well, congratulations. You finally have the attention of the ownership. I reached into my inside jacket pocket and pulled out a cell phone. Not my personal phone, but a secure line connected directly to the executive suite at Apex Really. What are you doing? Emily asked, her voice trembling. I am exercising my rights, I said. Harlan, connect me to the conference room at Apex. I believe the managing director is waiting for a call from the new chairman. Harlan punched a button on the conference phone console. It rang once, twice, and then a crisp, professional voice answered, This is Jenkins. We are all here, Mr. Ford. Good morning, Jenkins. I said, my voice projecting clearly through the room. I am currently in a meeting with one of your employees, Mr. Brad Miller. He is sitting right in front of me. Brad flinched as if he had been struck. He shook his head frantically, mouth thing. No, no, no. Yes, sir, Jenkins replied. We have the file you requested ready. Excellent, I said, keeping my eyes locked on Brad's terrified face. As the majority shareholder of Apex Realty, I have reviewed the preliminary audit regarding the escrow accounts managed by Mr. Miller. I believe we have seen enough to make an executive decision. I do not want to wait for the quarterly review. I agree, Sir Jenkins said. What are your instructions? I took a breath. This was it. The moment of retribution. The moment where I cut the cancer out of my family and my company. My first decision as chairman, I declared, my voice echoing in the silent room, is a personnel matter. Brad Miller is to be terminated immediately for cause effective this second. His access to the building is revoked. His company accounts are frozen. And Jenkins. Yes, sir? Call security. I said, have them clear out his desk box, up his personal effects, and leave them at the curb. He is not allowed back in the Ford Tower. Not as an employee, not as a tenant, not even as a visitor. If he steps foot on the property, have him arrested for trespassing. Understood, Mr. Ford. It is done. I pressed the button to end the call. The click was final. Absolute. Brad sat there, a man hollowed out. His career, his reputation, his future, all gone in a 30-second phone call. He had walked into this room thinking he was about to secure a loan to cover his crimes. Instead, he had just been publicly executed by the man he thought was a fool. You fired me, Brad whispered, the reality slowly sinking in. I didn't just fire you, son, I said, buttoning my jacket. I evicted you from your life. The speakerphone on the conference table crackled with the kind of electronic silence that screams of impending doom. Jenkins, the managing director of Apex Realty, was waiting on the other end of the line, invisible but palpable. Brad sat frozen in his chair, his face a portrait of ruin, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an exit that did not exist. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the polished mahogany, feeling the vibrations of the machine that was about to dismantle my son-in-law's life. Jenkins, I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a razor. I assume you have the contact information for the Charlotte Police Department's Economic Crimes Division handy. There was a sharp intake of breath from Brad. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with a new feral terror. Losing a job was one thing. Losing a reputation was another. But the police, that was a line he never thought I would cross. He thought family was a shield. He thought he could steal from clients, defraud banks, and insult me. And the worst that would happen was a slap on the wrist and a quiet resignation. Yes, Mr. Ford. Jenkins replied, his voice efficient and devoid of sympathy. We have a direct line to Detective Miller. The forensic accounting team has already packaged the evidence regarding the misappropriation of the escrow funds. Good. I said I want you to transmit the full file immediately. Do not hold anything back. Every unauthorized transfer, every falsified ledger, every penny of the $500,000 that went missing under Mr. Miller's watch, and Jenkins, make it clear that the ownership group is pressing full charges. This is not a civil matter. This is grand larceny and wire fraud. We want him prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No, Brad gasped, the sound tearing out of his throat like a wounded animal. You cannot do that. Garrison, please. I ignored him. I kept my eyes fixed on the speakerphone. And one more thing, Jenkins, ensure that the Real Estate Commission is notified. I want his license revoked by the end of the business day. He is never to sell another square foot of property in this state again. Is that understood? Understood, sir. It is already in motion. I reached out and severed the connection. The line went dead. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the sound of Emily's jagged breathing. She was shaking her hands, covering her mouth, staring at me as if I had just pulled a gun instead of a phone. But it was Brad who moved first. The shock had worn off, replaced by a sudden violent surge of adrenaline. The realization that his life was over, that he was going to prison, that his arrogance had led him into a trap from which there was no escape. It snapped something inside him, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "You old bastard!" he screamed, launching himself out of the chair. He scrambled over the table, scattering papers and knocking over the water pitcher. He wasn't thinking, he was just reacting. A cornered rat lashing out at the cat. His hands were clawed, reaching for my throat. "You set me up!" he roared, spit flying from his mouth. "You ruined me! I will kill you!" I did not move. I did not flinch. I had faced down union busters with baseball bats in the 80s. A soft-handed real estate broker in a designer suit did not frighten me. Before Brad could get within 3 FT of me, the side door of the conference room burst open. 2 men in dark suits who had been waiting silently in the adjoining office moved with a speed and precision that blurred the air. They were Harlan's private security former military police who didn't tolerate nonsense. One of them caught Brad in midair, intercepting his lunge with a shoulder check that sent the breath whooshing out of him. The other grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back, slamming him face first onto the mahogany table. "Get off me!" Brad yelled, struggling uselessly against the weight of the man holding him down. His cheek was pressed against the very guarantor form he had tried to force me to sign. Emily screamed. It was a high, piercing sound that grated on my nerves. She jumped up, rushing toward her husband, but stopped when Harlan raised a hand. "Sit down, Emily," Harlan commanded, his voice booming, "unless you want to be restrained as well." Dad stopped them. Emily cried, turning to me, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "They are hurting him. Please tell them to let him go. He tried to assault me, Emily," I said calmly, adjusting my tie. "He just added attempted assault and battery to his list of crimes. Let him stay right where he is." I walked around the table until I was standing over Brad. He was panting, his face red and pressed against the wood, his eyes rolling wildly. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw true fear. Not the fear of losing money, but the fear of a man who realizes he is entirely powerless. "You did this to yourself, Brad," I said quietly. "You thought you were the smartest man in the room. You thought you could mock my wife, threaten my relationship with my grandson, and steal from my company without consequences. You thought I was a joke." I leaned down close to his ear. "Who is the joke now?" Brad let out a sob, his fight draining away as the reality of the handcuffs crushed him. The security guard pulled him up, his hands secured behind his back, with zip ties they had produced from their pockets. "Get him out of here," I told them. "The police are on their way to the lobby. Hand him over to the officers waiting downstairs. Make sure he goes out through the main entrance. I want everyone in the building to see him. You cannot do this," Emily wailed, grabbing my arm. "Dad, please think about what you are doing. He is my husband. He is Leo's father. If he goes to prison, what happens to us? What happens to Leo? You are going to make your grandson the child of a convict." I pulled my arm away from her grip. It was a sharp, distinct motion. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, searching for the girl I had raised, the girl with integrity. But all I saw was a woman who had enabled a monster for 5 years. A woman who had stood silent while her mother was humiliated. A woman who had benefited from stolen money and then tried to manipulate me into covering it up. "Do not use Leo as a shield, Emily," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You lost the right to use that boy as leverage the moment you threatened to keep him from me on Christmas. But he needs his father. She sobbed, falling to her knees. He is a good dad. He just made a mistake. He is not a good dad. I corrected her. A good dad does not mortgage his family's home to pay off gambling debts. A good dad does not steal from his clients. A good dad does not model arrogance and cruelty for his son. Leo is better off without that influence. Emily looked up at me, her eyes wide with shock. You knew about the gambling? I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I opened the banking app and held it in front of her face. I know everything, Emily. I know about the $20,000 charge to the emergency credit card I gave you. The card that was for life or death situations. Emily stared at the screen. She gasped. I didn't know he did that. I swear, Dad, I didn't know. I looked at her, searching for truth. Perhaps she didn't know about the specific transaction, but she knew they were living a lie. She knew the money was coming from nowhere. She knew he was desperate. Ignorance is not a defense, Emily. I said, you lived in the house, you drove the cars, you spent the money, you enjoyed the lifestyle that he built on fraud. And when the walls started closing in, instead of asking questions, instead of standing up for what was right, you helped him try to trick me. You brought him to my house to manipulate me. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us that matched the emotional chasm opening in the floor. He is going to prison because he is a criminal, I said firmly, not because of me, because of his actions. And you are walking a very thin line, daughter. If the police find out you knew about his activities, if they find one shred of evidence that you were complicit in his gambling or his fraud, you will be in the cell right next to him. Emily buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The security guards began to march Brad toward the door. He didn't look back. He didn't say goodbye to his wife. He just hung his head, a broken man being led to his fate. I watched them go. The room felt empty, hollowed out by the violence of the truth. Beatrice reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were trembling, but her grip was strong. She had watched the whole thing in silence, her heart breaking. But she stood by me. She knew this had to be done. I looked down at Emily, who was still weeping on the floor. I felt a pang of pity, but I tamped it down. Pity would not help her now. Reality was the only thing that could save her. Get up, Emily, I said. She looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. Dad, help me, please. I have nothing. He mortgaged the house. We have no money. Where am I going to go? I looked at Harland. He nodded imperceptibly. He had the papers ready. You're going to face the consequences of your choices. I said, the house is gone. The cars are gone. The expensive life you didn't earn is gone. I walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline, at the Ford Tower, rising in the distance. You have a choice to make, Emily. You can stay on the floor and cry for a man who would have sold you out to save himself, or you can stand up, wipe your face, and figure out how to be a mother to your son. But do not look to me for a bailout. The bank of Dad is closed. I turned back to her. The look in my eyes was one she had never seen before. It was the look of a father who was done protecting his child from the world. You have 48 hours to vacate the house on Maple Drive. I said it is in my name and I am selling it to cover the debts your husband incurred. Pack what you can carry, leave the rest. But where will we live? She whispered. That, I said, turning away to help Beatrice stand up, is a problem for an adult to solve. Welcome to the real world, Emily. The heavy oak doors of the conference room did not just close behind the security team. They sealed the fate of a man who thought he was untouchable. I stood by the glass partition watching as two uniformed police officers met Harlan's private security team in the atrium. They did not behead Brad, but they might as well have. They handcuffed him right there in the open in front of the secretaries he had ignored, the junior brokers he had bullied, and the cleaning staff he had never once acknowledged. I saw the receptionists pointing and whispering. I saw cell phones being raised to record the spectacle. Brad Miller, the man who cared more about appearances than integrity, was now the star of a viral video that would likely be titled Executive Walk of Shame. He kept his head down staring at his Italian leather shoes, the only things he had left that looked expensive. He did not look back at the conference room. He did not look back for his wife. He was already thinking about his own survival, calculating his next lie, completely detaching himself from the wreckage he left behind. When he was finally shoved into the elevator and the door slid shut, the silence in the conference room shattered, Emily spun around to face me. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and blotchy red skin, but her eyes were dry now, filled with a venom I had never seen before. It was not the look of a daughter looking at her father. It was the look of an enemy. "Are you happy now?" she screamed, her voice echoing off the expensive wood paneling. "Is this what you wanted to humiliate us, to destroy my life just to prove a point? Because your feelings got hurt at Thanksgiving?" She took a step toward me, her hands balled into fists at her sides. "You are a monster," she spat. "You sat there and watched them take him away like he was an animal. You could have stopped it. You own the company. You could have just fired him and let us handle it privately. You could have covered the money. What is $500,000 to you? It is pocket change. But no, you had to make a show of it. You had to call the police. You chose money over family. I did not back down. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at her with the fatigue of a man who has carried a heavy load for too long and finally decided to set it down. I did not destroy your life, Emily," I said calmly. "Your husband did that when he stole nearly $500,000 from client escrow accounts. He did that when he forged your signature on a predatory loan. He did that when he treated the law like a suggestion. I just turned on the lights. If you do not like what you see, do not blame the switch." "I hate you," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I am done with you. You think your money gives you the right to control us? Well, keep it. We don't want it. And you know what else? You don't get Leo. You are never going to see your grandson again. I will take him so far away you won't even find us on a map. I will tell him his grandfather is dead. I will tell him you abandoned us." That threat, the nuclear option. She was playing the only card she thought she had left. But she was playing it against the dealer, and she had forgotten who shuffled the deck. "You aren't going anywhere, Emily," I said, my voice dropping to a register that made Harlan look up from his papers. "Because you have nowhere to go." I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city where my buildings stood tall and proud against the skyline. That house on Maple Drive, I continued, keeping my back to her. "Do you remember the day we bought it?" "It was 5 years ago. You were pregnant with Leo. Beatrice and I walked through the empty rooms with you. We talked about where the crib would go. Beatrice spent 3 weekends on her hands and knees, planting those hydrangeas in the front yard because she wanted her grandson to grow up surrounded by beauty." I turned back to face her. "I paid cash for that house, Emily. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths in the best school district in the city. I put the deed in a family trust so you would always have a roof over your head. I thought I was buying you a sanctuary. I thought I was buying you security." I paused, letting the memory collide with the reality. But I wasn't buying a home. I was buying a stage for Brad to play the big shot. I was buying a collateral asset for him to gamble against. You let him turn my gift into a lie. You let him mortgage the roof over your son's head to pay for his vices. The house is in my name. I stated the facts, hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. And as of this moment, I am evoking the occupancy clause. You have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if she couldn't breathe. You are kicking me out, me and Leo. You are making your grandson homeless. I am not making him homeless. I corrected her sharply. I am removing him from a crime scene. I am selling the house. Emily, the proceeds will go directly to Apex Realty to cover the funds your husband embezzled. I will not let my company suffer because of his theft. I will make the books whole, and I will do it with the asset he tried to steal. But we have rights. She stammered, her defiance crumbling into panic. Squatters' rights. You can't just Harland has the eviction notice ready, I interrupted. And don't bother looking for the checkbook or the savings account or the trust fund I set up for Leo's education. Her eyes widened. Leo's money. You can't touch that. That is for his college. That is his money. It is for his future, I said sternly. And right now his future is being gambled away by his parents. I have frozen the trust, Emily. It is locked down tight until Leo turns 25. Not a single penny comes out. Not for tuition, not for clothes, and certainly not for bail money for your husband. You don't have access. Brad doesn't have access. It is gone. She stood there stripping away the layers of denial one by one. She looked down at her designer purse, her manicured nails, the diamond earrings Brad had bought her likely with stolen money. She realized perhaps for the first time in her adult life that she owned absolutely nothing. The car she drove was a lease in Brad's name which would default next month. The house belonged to me. The money was stolen. The husband was in handcuffs. You can't leave me with nothing. She whispered, her voice trembling with genuine terror. I don't have a job. I haven't worked in 5 years. How am I supposed to feed Leo? How am I supposed to live? That I said, buttoning my jacket and signaling Harlan that we were done, is the question you should have asked yourself when you signed that second mortgage document. Or wait, you didn't sign it. You just let him do it. You let him drive the car off the cliff because you liked the view from the passenger seat. I walked past her toward the door. Beatrice was waiting for me in the lobby. I needed to get to her. I needed to wash the stink of this betrayal off my skin. I stopped with my hand on the door handle and looked back at my daughter. She looked small alone in the middle of the massive boardroom, surrounded by the trappings of wealth she had coveted but never earned. You have a choice, Emily. I said, you can keep blaming me. You can keep defending the man who lied to you, stole from you, and forged your name. You can follow him down the drain and spend the next 10 years waiting for him to get out of prison. Or you can wake up. You can pack your things, leave that house, and figure out who you are without his credit card in your pocket. I opened the door. If you decide to be a mother to your son, I will be watching. But if you decide to be a wife to that convict, you are on your own. The clock starts now. 48 hours. Emily, don't be late. I walked out, leaving her standing in the wreckage of the life she thought she had, with nothing but the echo of the closing door to keep her company. She had tried to call my bluff, but she forgot that I wasn't playing a game. I was cleaning house, and for the first time in years, the air finally felt clean. The faucet in the kitchen sink dripped with a rhythmic, maddening persistence that seemed to count the seconds of my new life. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop was a reminder of what I had lost and where I had landed. The apartment was a third-floor walk up on the east side of the city, a neighborhood I used to drive through with the doors locked and the windows rolled up. Now it was home. It smelled of boiled cabbage and stale cigarette smoke that seeped through the paper-thin walls from the neighbor next door. The carpet was a shade of brown that was designed to hide dirt, but only managed to look perpetually filthy. The heating unit rattled and wheezed, blowing lukewarm air that did little to combat the December chill seeping through the single-pane windows. I sat at the small, wobbling laminate table counting out my tips from the shift. $50. I was working as a cashier at a discount grocery chain, standing on my feet for 8 hours a day, scanning coupons and enduring the impatience of strangers who looked at me like I was part of the machinery. My feet throbbed in shoes that were not designed for standing. Shoes that used to be my casual weekend wear, but were now my work uniform. My manicured nails were gone, chipped away by manual labor and the harsh reality of scrubbing my own toilet. Leo sat across from me, slurping instant noodles from a chipped bowl. He was 6 years old. He should have been eating organic vegetables and free-range chicken in a dining room with crown molding. Instead, he was eating 50-cent sodium bombs in a room where the paint was peeling off the ceiling in long gray strips. He didn't complain. That was the part that broke me the most. He just ate his little legs, swinging back and forth, accepting this new reality with the adaptability of a child. He asked me earlier if we were camping. I told him yes. We were camping just for a while. It had been 30 days since my father walked out of that conference room and let the heavy door slam shut on my previous life. 30 days since the police dragged Brad away in handcuffs. 30 days since I realized that the safety net I had bounced on my entire life had been cut away. The first week was a blur of panic and denial. I stayed in a motel burning through the cash I had in my wallet waiting for someone to save me. I called my mother, but she just cried and said she couldn't go against Garrison. I called my friends, the women I did yoga with, the women I drank mimosas with. They didn't answer. Or if they did, they were suddenly very busy. The scandal was toxic. No one wanted to be associated with the wife of the embezzler. So I got a job. I found this apartment. I learned how to take the bus. Because the leased BMW was repossessed 3 days after Brad's arrest. I learned that milk costs money. I learned that electricity costs money. I learned that pride is a luxury item I can no longer afford. The phone on the wall rang. It was a landline that came with the apartment. The only way Brad could call me collect from the county detention center. I stared at it. I didn't want to answer. Every time he called, it was the same loop of anger, blame, and delusion. But he was my husband. He was Leo's father. I felt a phantom tether pulling me toward the receiver. The last thread of the loyalty I had clung to for 5 years. I picked it up. "You accepted the charges," a robotic voice announced. "Emily." Brad's voice barked before I could even say hello. "Where have you been?" "I have been trying to call you since yesterday." "Do you have an idea what it is like in here?" "It is freezing. The food is inedible. I am sleeping on a metal cot." I took a deep breath, leaning my forehead against the cool plaster of the wall. "I am working, Brad. I have a job. I cannot answer the phone whenever I want." "A job?" He scoffed. It was an ugly, dismissive sound. "Doing what scanning cans?" "You are wasting your time. Listen to me. I spoke to a new lawyer today. This guy is a shark. He says he can get the charges reduced. He says we can argue that it was a misunderstanding, that the funds were just misallocated temporarily, but he needs a retainer. $5,000. I looked at the pile of crumpled bills on the table. $5,000. I didn't even have $500. I do not have $5,000, Brad. I said, my voice flat. We have nothing. You know that. Dad seized the house. The accounts are frozen. I am making minimum wage. You have the jewelry, he snapped. The diamond earrings I bought you for our anniversary, the tennis bracelet, your engagement ring. Sell them, pawn them, do whatever you have to do. That ring alone is worth 10 grand. Get the money, Emily. I need to get out of here. I cannot survive another week in this place. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond solitaire sparkled under the harsh, fluorescent light of the kitchen. It was a symbol of a promise to love, honor, and protect. He was asking me to sell it not to feed our son, not to pay for rent, but to buy him a lawyer who would sell him a lie. He hasn't asked about Leo, I realized. The thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. We had been on the phone for 3 minutes. He hadn't asked how his son was handling the move. He hadn't asked if Leo was scared. He hadn't asked if Leo had enough to eat. Did you hear me? Brad demanded, his voice rising. Go to a pawn shop tomorrow, get the cash, and call your father. Tell him I will sign whatever he wants if he drops the charges. Tell him I will give up my rights to the company. He owns the company, Brad, I said quietly. He doesn't need you to give up anything. He took it, just like you took the money from the escrow accounts. Don't you start with me, he hissed. You enjoyed the money too, Emily. You didn't ask questions when we were flying first class to Cabo. You didn't ask where the cash came from when you bought those designer bags. You are just as guilty as I am. So don't play the saint. You owe me this. You need to get me out so I can fix this. I am the only one who can fix this. I listened to him rant. I listened to him blame my father, blame his boss, blame the economy, blame me. I listened to the narcissism pouring out of him like toxic sludge. And for the first time in 5 years, the fog in my brain cleared. He didn't love me. He never loved me. He loved the access I gave him. He loved the proximity to my father's perceived wealth, even when we thought Dad was just a retired mechanic with a nest egg. He loved having an audience. He loved having a prop. I looked at Leo. He had finished his noodles and was now drawing on the back of a grocery flyer with a broken crayon. He was humming a little song to himself, trying to create his own happiness in a room devoid of it. He deserved a father who asked about him. He deserved a mother who protected him. I owe you nothing, I said. The line went silent for a second. What did you say? I said, I owe you nothing, Brad. I touched the ring on my finger. I am not selling my jewelry to pay for your lawyer. I am selling it to pay for Leo's school tuition so he doesn't have to change schools in the middle of the year. I am selling it to buy winter coats. I am selling it to survive the mess you made. You selfish, Brad screamed. You are going to leave me in here. You are going to let them rot me. I am your husband. Not for long, I said. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline, from the sudden rushing realization that I was free. I was poor. I was tired. I was living in a dump. But I was free from the weight of his ego. I was free from the constant, exhausting effort of pretending our life was perfect. I walked over to the table and sat down next to Leo. I smoothed his hair back. He looked up at me with big dark eyes, my father's eyes. Who is that, Mommy? He asked. That was the past, Leo, I said. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was an older model I had bought prepaid because my service had been cut off. I dialed a number I knew by heart, not because I called it often, but because it was the number my father always told me to call if I was in trouble. It rang 3 times. Wolf Law, a woman's voice answered. Hi, I said, my voice steady and strong. This is Emily Miller. I need to speak to Harland Wolf. He might be in a meeting, Ms. Miller. Is this regarding the eviction? No, I said. I looked at the ring on my finger one last time before sliding it off. It left a pale band of skin where it had been a scar of a marriage that wasn't real. Tell him I am not calling for money, I said. Tell him I am not calling to beg my father for a bailout. Tell him I need him to draft divorce papers. I want full custody, and I want to change my name back to Ford. There was a pause on the line, a shift in tone. I will put you through immediately, Emily. I waited. I watched my son color a picture of a house. It was a crooked house with a chimney and a sun in the corner. It wasn't a mansion. It was small. It was sturdy. It looked like a home. Harland picked up. Emily. Hi, Harland, I said, and for the first time in a month, I didn't feel like crying. I am ready to sign. I am ready to be a Ford again. The Saturday afternoon sun was pale and watery, filtering through the bare branches of the oak trees lining my driveway. I stood by the front window, watching the street, a habit I developed over the last month. I wasn't waiting for a courier or a lawyer this time. I was waiting for my daughter. But when she appeared, I almost didn't recognize her. She wasn't driving a luxury SUV. She wasn't stepping out of a rideshare. She was walking up the long driveway from the bus stop a quarter of a mile down the road. She wore a heavy winter coat that I didn't recognize, something practical and thick, likely bought at a thrift store, and her hair was pulled back in a severe non-nonsense bun. As she got closer, the changes became more apparent. The Emily who had stood in Harlan's conference room screaming at me had been soft manicured and fragile. This woman looked weathered. Her face was thinner, the cheekbones sharper, and her skin had lost that expensive spa day glow, replaced by the pore of someone who works long hours under fluorescent lights. She looked tired, bone-deep tired, but she was moving with the steady, rhythmic pace that suggested she had somewhere to be, not that she was wandering lost. I opened the door before she could knock. Beatrice was standing behind me, her hands clasped nervously at her waist. She'd put on her best cardigan. The blue one Emily had always said brought out her eyes. Beatrice wanted to bake a cake. I told her not to. We weren't celebrating. We were negotiating the terms of a surrender or perhaps a treaty. "Hi, Dad," Emily said. Her voice was quiet, stripped of the shrill entitlement that had defined it for years. "Hello, Emily," I replied, stepping back to let her in. She walked into the foyer, bringing a gust of cold air with her. She didn't hug me. She didn't look around the house with the critical eye she used to have judging the old furniture or the lack of modern art. She looked at the house like it was a cathedral she had been excommunicated from. She took off her coat and hung it on the rack herself. Underneath, she wore a simple sweater and dark slacks, the kind of clothes you wear when you need to disappear into a job, not stand out at a brunch. Her hands were red from the cold, and I noticed the absence of the diamond ring immediately. The tan line on her finger was fading, but the scar of the marriage was still there. "Mom?" She said, her voice catching as she saw Beatrice. Beatrice took a step forward, her arms opening instinctively, but Emily didn't walk into the embrace. Instead, she did something that stopped my heart for a beat. She dropped to her knees on the hardwood floor, right there in the entryway. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking. "Emily." Beatrice gasped, rushing to her. "Honey, what is wrong? Get up, please." "No, Mom." Emily sobbed, refusing to rise. "I need to say this down here. I need you to hear me." She looked up at Beatrice, her face wet with tears but her eyes clear and direct. "I'm so sorry," she choked out. "That night at Thanksgiving, when he made fun of you, when he mocked your hearing, I sat there. I sat there and I drank my wine and I let him do it. I let him humiliate you because I was afraid of him, because I wanted to keep the peace, because I was weak." Beatrice stroked Emily's hair, her own eyes filling with tears. "Oh, sweetie, that is in the past. It does not matter. It matters," Emily insisted, grabbing Beatrice's hand and pressing it to her cheek. "It matters because you lost your hearing, saving my life. You gave a piece of yourself to keep me safe, and I repaid you by letting a man treat you like a burden. I am so ashamed, Mom. I am so sorry I forgot who you are. I am so sorry I forgot who I was." I stood by the door, my throat tight. This was not the apology of a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. This was the atonement of a woman who had seen the bottom of the barrel and realized she put herself there. She wasn't asking for money, She wasn't blaming Brad, she was owning her silence. Beatrice pulled her up, then wrapping her in a hug that was fierce and absolute. I watched them, mother and daughter, reconnecting across the chasm Brad had dug between them. After a long moment, Emily pulled away. She wiped her face with her sleeve, a gesture so unpretentious it hurt to watch. She turned to me. The softness she had shown her mother evaporated, replaced by a steeliness that reminded me of myself 40 years ago. She walked over to the hallway table. She reached into her purse, a canvas tote bag, not the designer leather she used to carry, and pulled out 2 items. She placed a credit card on the table. It was the emergency card ending in 4098. The plastic was intact, but it looked heavy, burdened with the memory of the $20,000 bet Brad had tried to place. Next to it, she placed a set of car keys, not the BMW keys. Those were gone with the repo man. These were the spare keys to the Maple Drive house, the ones she had kept in her jewelry box. I don't need these anymore, she said, her voice steady. I cleared out the house, Dad. It is empty. I hired a cleaning crew with the money I got from selling my designer handbags. It is ready for you to list. I looked at the items, the symbols of my protection, the symbols of my control, and the card I asked. I never used it, she said. Not once since I left. I almost did a few times when I couldn't buy milk, when the electric bill for the apartment came due. But I knew if I used it, I would just be opening the door again. I would just be admitting I couldn't do it. She pushed the card toward me. Cancel it, Dad. Please, I don't want the safety net. It strangles me. I picked up the card. I took a pair of scissors from the drawer in the table and cut it in half. The snap of the plastic was the sound of a cord being cut, not out of anger, but out of necessity. I looked at her. She was waiting. I knew what she was waiting for. She was waiting for the verdict. She was waiting to see if her apology had bought her a ticket back into the castle. I love you, Emily, I said. I love you too, Dad. But you cannot come back here, I said. Beatrice made a small sound of protest behind me, but I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes locked on Emily. You cannot move back into your old room, I continued. I will not pay your rent. I will not buy your groceries. I will not co-sign a lease for you. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She nodded slowly. I know, she said. I stepped closer to her. But Leo is my grandson, I said. He is innocent in this. I will pay his tuition at private school directly to the institution. I will set up an account at the school cafeteria so he always has hot lunch. I will buy his winter clothes and leave them at the school office. But I will not give you a dime of cash. You have to figure out how to keep the lights on. You have to figure out how to put food on the table for dinner. Why, Beatrice whispered her hand on my arm. Garrison, we have so much. Why make her suffer? Because she needs to know she can. I said, never breaking eye contact with my daughter. She needs to know that she can survive without a man propping her up. She needs to know that her worth comes from her labor, not her last name. I looked at Emily. Do you understand? She took a deep breath. She looked at her rough hands. She looked at her cheap coat. Then she looked at me. And for the first time in years, I saw the fire in her eyes. The Ford fire. I understand, Dad, she said. And you are right. If you saved me now, I would never forgive myself. I need to know I can do this. She buttoned her coat. She didn't ask to stay for dinner. She knew she had to get back. She had a shift tomorrow. She had a son to feed. I am working at a grocery store, she said, a hint of pride creeping into her voice. I got promoted to shift supervisor yesterday. It is a 50-cent raise. It isn't much, but I earned it. I showed up early every day. I worked double shifts. They promoted me because I worked hard, not because of who my father is. That is worth more than $1 million, I said. She opened the door. The afternoon light was fading into the gray of evening. She stepped out onto the porch, the same porch where Brad had stood, and threatened me. But where he had looked small and petty, she looked substantial. I filed the papers. Harlan told you, she asked. He did, I confirmed. Good. She said, I am taking my name back. I am going to be Emily Ford again, and this time, I am going to make sure that name means something more than just a trust fund. She turned and walked down the steps. She didn't look back at the big house. She didn't look back at the warmth she was leaving behind. She walked toward the road, her head held high, her stride long and purposeful. She was walking back to a cold apartment and a hard job. She was walking back to struggle. But as I watched her go disappearing into the twilight, I didn't feel pity. I felt a swelling in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. It was pride. She was no longer the girl who hid behind her husband. She was a woman standing on her own 2 feet. I put my arm around Beatrice. She is going to be all right, isn't she? Beatrice asked softly. Yes, I said, closing the door against the cold. She is going to be better than all right. She is going to be strong, and that is the only inheritance that the tax man can't take away. The seasons have a way of cycling through grief and renewal, turning the sharp edges of memory into something smoother, something you can handle without bleeding. It has been exactly 1 year since the Thanksgiving dinner that tore my family apart. And today the air in Charlotte is crisp and smells of fallen leaves just like it did then. But inside the house, the atmosphere is entirely different. There is no tension, there is no pretense. There is only the smell of pot roast simmering in the slow cooker and the sound of a 7-year-old boy laughing in the backyard. I stood at the kitchen sink washing vegetables, watching Leo through the window. He was running circles around the old oak tree, dragging a stick through the dirt, lost in a world of his own imagination. He looked taller, stronger. He looked like a boy who was no longer walking on eggshells, afraid of upsetting a father who treated his home like a showroom. Brad was not here to critique his posture or tell him to be quiet. Brad was currently inmate number 7492 at the Butner Federal Correctional Complex, serving the first year of a 5-year sentence for wire fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. Harlan Wolf had attended the sentencing on my behalf. He told me Brad cried when the judge read the verdict. He didn't cry for his family. He cried because they took away his watch. A car pulled into the driveway. It was not a leased luxury sedan. It was a 5-year-old Toyota Camry, sensible, reliable, and most importantly, paid for in full. Emily stepped out. She balanced a grocery bag on her hip while closing the door. She looked different than she did a year ago. The brittle, anxious socialite was gone. In her place was a woman who wore her hair in a practical ponytail, who wore jeans and a sweater because they were comfortable, not because they were trending. She looked tired. Yes, there were fine lines around her eyes that spoke of early shifts and late nights balancing a checkbook, but she also looked solid. She looked like she occupied her own space in the world. I wiped my hands on a towel and went to open the door. "Hi, Dad," she said, smiling as she walked in. The smile reached her eyes. That was new. For years, her smiles had been performances. This one was real. "Hello, Emily," I said, taking the bag from her. "What is this dessert?" she said proudly. I made an apple crumble, and I paid for the apples myself. It was on sale, but I picked the best ones. We walked into the kitchen. Beatrice was there setting the table. When she saw Emily, her face lit up. "Mom," Emily said, speaking in a normal conversational volume. "The crumble is still warm?" "That sounds lovely, dear," Beatrice replied instantly. She didn't lean forward. She didn't squint. She heard it perfectly. We sat down to eat. It was a simple meal: pot roast carrots, potatoes, and the crumble. There was no wine. There was no bragging about mergers or acquisitions. We talked about real things. Emily talked about her job at the grocery store. She had been promoted to store manager last month. She talked about the challenges of scheduling shifts, about dealing with supply chain issues, about the satisfaction of hitting her sales targets. She spoke with the authority of someone who earned her paycheck. "I finally filed the last of the divorce papers yesterday," Emily said quietly between bites. "It is done. I am officially Emily Ford again." I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. "How do you feel, lighter?" she said. "I thought I would be sad. I thought I would feel like a failure, but Dad, I feel like I survived a storm. I feel lucky." She looked at Leo, who was happily mashing his potatoes. "Brad sent a letter," she added. "He asked for money for the commissary. He said the food is terrible." "And what did you do?" I asked. "I threw it in the trash," she said. "I have bills to pay. I have a son to raise. I don't have money for criminals." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Her palm was rougher than it used to be, calloused from work. It was the most beautiful hand I had ever held. "I am proud of you, Emily. I said you have built a life, a real life," she squeezed back. "I learned from the best, Dad. It just took me a while to pay attention." After lunch, Emily took Leo out to the front yard to help him collect acorns. I stayed on the porch with Beatrice. We sat in our rocking chairs, the same ones we had sat in for 20 years. The sun was beginning to set, casting long golden shadows across the lawn. It was the golden hour, my favorite time of day. Beatrice reached up and adjusted the device behind her ear. It was a state-of-the-art hearing aid, custom, molded with technology that filtered out wind noise and amplified speech. It cost $6,000. I had paid for it the day after Brad was arrested. It was the first check I wrote from the Ford Holdings account after taking control. "Can you hear that?" Beatrice asked softly, tilting her head. "Hear what I asked?" "The cardinal," she said, pointing to the high branches of the oak tree. "He is singing. It is a high, trilling sound." "I haven't heard that sound in 10 years, Garrison. I forgot how sweet it is." I listened. I heard it too. A faint, cheerful song cutting through the autumn air. I looked at my wife. Tears were glistening in her eyes. Not tears of pain, but tears of pure, rediscovered joy. She was listening to the world again. She was no longer cut off. She was no longer a punchline for a cruel man's joke. She was whole. I looked out at my daughter and grandson. They were laughing. Leo was throwing a pile of leaves into the air, and Emily was chasing him, her laughter ringing out clear and true. They were safe. They were struggling, yes, but it was a good struggle. It was the struggle of growth, not the struggle of drowning. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the wood slats against my spine. I thought about the journey of the last year. I thought about the deception, the anger, the courtroom battles, the public humiliation of my son-in-law. I thought about the money. 30 years of building an empire, hiding it away, only to use it as a weapon when it mattered most. People often say that money cannot buy happiness. They say it is the root of all evil. And in many ways, they are right. Money did not make Brad a good man. It only amplified his greed. Money did not save my daughter's marriage. It only exposed the cracks in the foundation. But as I sat there watching my wife listen to a bird sing for the first time in a decade, watching my daughter stand on her own 2 feet, I realized that the saying is incomplete. Money cannot buy happiness. It is true. But money can buy the truth. It can buy the clarity to see who is standing with you in the dark. It can buy the power to protect the people you love from the wolves who want to devour them. And the price I had to pay to see the true hearts of the people around me. The price of losing a son-in-law, of shattering my daughter's illusions, of stepping out of the shadows and revealing my power. It was a high price. It was an expensive lesson. But looking at Beatrix's smile, hearing that bird sing, and knowing that my family was finally truly safe, it was worth every single penny. I reached out and took Beatrice's hand. Her skin was warm and soft. She squeezed my fingers, looking at me with eyes that knew everything I had done, everything I had risked, and everything I had saved. "It is a beautiful song, isn't it, Garrison?" she whispered. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," I replied. I smiled, a genuine, deep smile that came from a soul at rest. I held her hand tighter as the sun dipped below the horizon and the screen of the day faded gently to black. The drama was over, the silence was gone, and all that was left was the truth. Life has taught me that money is a powerful tool, but a terrible master. It can build empires, but it cannot build character. Brad had ambition without honor, and it cost him his freedom. Emily had comfort without independence, and it cost her self-respect until she was forced to find it. True wealth is not the number in your bank account. It is the ability to look yourself in the mirror and know you earned your place. Sometimes the greatest act of love is not giving your children what they want, but letting them struggle for what they need. If you believe that integrity is worth more than gold, hit that like button and share this story. Have you ever had to use tough love to save a family member? Tell me your story in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about justice and redemption.